House Podcast, episode 12. And today's guest is a senior character artist at Bethesda Softworks. He's been working in the gaming industry for 16 plus years and has published games like Fallout 76, DC Universe Online, and much more. Please welcome David Jennison. David, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
David, I wanted to congratulate you right off the bat for one thing. I mean, having a successful career as an artist in the games industry, and also for the release of Witchkin. I mean, I know this is a few years after, but congrats on that.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. That was a labor of love.
Yeah, absolutely. And what inspired you to want to make Witchkin?
It's funny. I was asked this question constantly, like 3 years ago, and I haven't been asked it, so I got to kind of. I had wanted to make my own game for a while, and at the time, my kids were playing a lot of Slender and Five Nights at Freddy's, and I played Slender, and I found it really scary, and I'm like, I feel like I could make something like this, and then I mentioned the Teletubbies to my kids, and they were, how old were they at the time? They were 10 and 12? Yeah. They had never heard of Teletubbies. And I showed it to them, and they were absolutely terrified. They're like, that's really creepy. I was like, I guess it is creepy. And so then we started talking about, what if there's a horror game about Teletubbies? And then that just kind of like, well, what if it was toys? And then an hour later, it was like, I could see that being a game. So yeah, and then I just dove into it. I worked on it like crazy nights and weekends for 2.5 years while I was at Gunfire Games. They were very cool in that they were like, yeah, you can work on your own game. You know, it's a different genre than what you're doing for us. So that was really cool of them. And then we published it.
That's awesome. Have your kids played Witchkin?
Oh yeah, they had to. That was part of their chore. They had to QA for me. So they did the voiceover work. Like my son is the voice of Marcy. He couldn't do it now because his voice is really deep.
Right.
And then my daughter did some voices. She did some of the screams, and then she was playing violin at the time, and I kind of used her. I had her do some sounds on the violin and kind of used that. But yeah, it was like a family affair. We'd go to shows and they would be there, but yeah, they played it. I've got some good video of my son getting really scared. There was one level with one of the toys he didn't want to play. It's like, I'm not going to test that level. It's too much. But
oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And, so the characters were inspired from early 1900s toys.
Yes.
That's pretty interesting because they're really creepy looking, and it definitely triggered my childhood fear of dolls. Like,
yeah,
I don't know if you ever seen like the Chucky or Child's Play movies.
Yeah.
But oh man, I used to think to myself like, I wish they turned this into a game. Like I always had an idea where you're in a house by yourself, and Chucky knows you're there. And maybe you can kind of hear his footsteps and he can like mess with you. And I was kind of getting that vibe from Witchkin. And I was like, finally, they make a game like this where you're kind of immersed in a house and there's things coming after you,
Yeah, I mean, the whole point was like make you really feel like a little kid, make you feel very helpless. There were things like I tried to, like the sepia tone worked, I think, for because how far you could see was so short. I wanted it to feel like if you ever opened your eyes in a lake underwater, it's really scary because you can only see like 5 feet in front of you. And it's like anything could be beyond that. But spend a lot of playthrough videos of people screaming and stuff. So that's enjoyable.
Have you ever seen people like streaming it on Twitch?
Oh yeah. It came about when Twitch was kind of starting, so there's not nearly as many as there are like YouTube videos.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's people from all over the world. It's very strange to see. People screaming Russian or in Thai or Chinese or something. Yeah, and it's actually funny because there was a Japanese person. This guy was playing it. and he was talking throughout the whole thing. And so I was like, oh, wow, he must be, I wonder what he's saying about my game. And I clicked the little translate thing, and he was talking about local Japanese politics the whole time he was playing. It was
That's
like
so
what was
funny.
going on in his prefecture and the laws that they were looking at getting passed, like while he was playing this horror game. So yeah, that was funny.
And here you're thinking of like, I wonder what he's saying about my game. Like,
Yeah, what is he criticizing it? Is he like, this is a profound game from the Americans? Yeah, but no, he was just talking about stuff. So yeah, that was funny.
have you read like the Steam reviews for Witchkin?
Yeah, I stepped off of it. Um, you're a mental health advocate,
I
right?
am.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so I went through a major depression right after Witchkin came out, and I stepped off of it, and didn't look at it for a long time. But now I think I think it's at 90% as far as the reviews. Um, but yeah, I read it. Well, we made a few mistakes when we launched it. We overcharged. That was one big mistake. We just, we were charging twice as much as Five Nights at Freddy's, which is not smart. But we were thinking like, oh, well, we can always bring the price down, right? So let's start big. Um, but what we didn't really realize is you get that first week when you launch on Steam, and that's it. That's when your game is up on the front of the page. After that, unless you go viral, you're just buried. Um,
Wow.
so it didn't matter after that if we dropped the price. So now I think it's like $3 or $4, but yeah. Yeah, after a while, I started like reading the reviews and stuff like that. So.
That's a scary feeling that you're working so hard on something that you're really passionate about, and it comes down to that first week
Yeah,
of release.
yeah.
That's oh, just thinking about it right now is just making me like, oh, like that
Well,
is
it's funny. What comes to mind is there's a Seinfeld episode about an Olympic athlete. I don't know if you're familiar with Seinfeld, anyways,
oh, I
but
am. Yeah.
he okay. So the guy he was a runner and his alarm didn't go off, so he missed the race. So and the stand up act part of that, he's like, it's so crazy. These people spend their whole lives, and then like it's like 1 second. It's like, oh, I was just too late. So
It was the
obviously,
damn snooze button.
yeah, it was the volume. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's the same. I think it's the same thing where you've got that. Same thing. We tried to kickstart it and stuff like that, and everything's got to line up and be perfect. And if something's off, it just makes it harder. But it gave me a really good appreciation, I think, of when people do have a hit, and they launch, and I think they're as surprised as everybody else. I think anybody with any kind of honesty with themselves goes into it thinking like, yes, it's very unlikely that this will be a hit, even if it's good.
Right.
But it did what I wanted it to, and it gave me a lot of credit. So down the road, if I had publisher interest, but the part of the deal with Gunfire is they're like, you can do your own game, but you can't work with another publisher because you're working for a publisher right now, obviously. So that was reasonable, but that made it so we couldn't work with a publisher. And the biggest thing a publisher gives you is visibility and marketing and everything like that. So, but it's
Right.
good. I mean, I made some connections. So if down the road I choose to do something else, but yeah,
That's good. Yeah. Um, you don't have to expand on this if you're not comfortable, but how you felt after releasing Witchkin, was it like the harsh criticisms, like where they're just not like giving you good feedback, where it's just blatant, like just flaming your
sure.
game that sort of made you feel that
It
way, or
actually wasn't it wasn't my depression or like what happened with me didn't really have anything to do with that.
oh, okay,
There was I had something with work where something happened and it just affected me in a way that I never would have predicted.
hmm,
I dealt with depression since my 20s, and I think it might have been my age. It might have been my kind of midlife. I think at the time I was 43. Um, but yeah, it didn't have anything to do with. But I think some of it was that I had built up making this game and going to shows and having people like it and admire it and everything, and my ego had just been building and building and building. And the whole time, I wasn't a douche. Well, I'd like to think I wasn't a douche, where I was like, oh, I'm so great. But it was almost like my confidence had hit a peak. And then there was a thing at work that I don't want to get into, but it just shattered my ego.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize my ego was that fragile, and it tossed me into just the worst depression I'd ever had, and I never would have thought that that was going to happen. So yeah, it's been, geez, well, 5 years from that time of kind of coming back from that. But yeah,
Wow. I'm glad to hear at least there's been, some growth since then. And, because I'm sure that that's a hard thing to go through. And, it, I mean, it can't be easy working on a passion project, also working for another company. And it's like all while being an artist, which that alone can be stressful. I've done like hobbyist artwork before. And even just doing personal stuff sometimes can just be stressful, like personal
right,
pieces.
right.
So
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm somewhat manic as far as I'll get into something, and like I'm into something else right now. Um, and I didn't really realize it. A lot of my colleagues were like, "Oh, dude, you're making your own game. Like that's crazy. That's crazy." And it's like, um, I think it's because my brain was kind of a sustained manic for like 2.5 years, where
mhm.
it's all I could think about. It's all I wanted to do with my time. Um, and there was some sort of a crash that seemed to happen right. It was right after it launched, and all of a sudden it was like, yeah, it was weird. But it was a, I will, that it was a learning experience, right? It was a, they talk about midlife crises, and I hope that's what mine was. I felt like I was due for one.
Yeah,
I'm 47 now. Maybe I'll have another one. I don't know what that one's going to be, but it
hopefully
was
it's just the
definitely
one.
a, yeah, it was definitely like, wait, have I been lying to myself? Like, who am I? What? I mean, it's like a movie, right?
Right.
But yeah, that's good. And Bethesda's been great. And I think I've kind of got my confidence back up and everything like that. But
That's good.
yeah.
So I actually got into 3D art recently,
Oh,
and
cool.
that was part of the reason also why I wanted to reach out to you, just because like I was just super impressed by your work. And
Oh, thank you.
you know 3D art, what I love about it is when you hit that render button and you really see how beautiful it looks and like
Yeah.
all its details, it makes it worth all of that hard work going into it. And
Yeah.
I also did some work with what is more of the detailed softwares like Substance Painter
Okay.
also.
Yeah. Yeah.
uh that one's fun because then you could kind of get down to like the nitty gritty of your
Yeah. All the
model.
details and stuff. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
What was it like when you were first starting to learn 3D art?
Well, so I was working, let's see, I got into it late as far as careers go. I was 28. And I was in between. I was also, I have a background in music, and I was studying like film scoring, and I wanted to do video game scoring, but I was also kind of an artist. And then I got I got a job doing QA for EALA, and through my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. And I got my hands on Maya, and I thought that probably you did too. A lot of people do. They thought that 3D art was like all about like programming and like geometry and math, which I'm not good at any of those things. And then I made a chair, and I was like, I can do this. This is just sculpting with a program.
Yeah.
So I immediately, again, I was just like, dive into it. At the time, this was when like normal mapping was just starting to be a thing. I don't know if you're familiar with normal mapping, where you can get like high detail. You can get you trick the game engine into thinking that a surface is more detailed than it is. It's lit as if it has detail,
Right.
whereas before they didn't have that, right? So yeah, like a lot of the stuff I was making, I don't even think I was using normal maps in the beginning. It was all just hand painted. I didn't use a pad. I didn't even know you could. I was like hand painting with the mouse. I'm like, this is awesome. It's like, wow, it's amazing. Um, and then once I once I was like, okay, I want to do this, and then it was immediately like, all right, what's my bar? What do I have to hit? How good do I have to get? Gathering all the professional stuff. I'm like, okay, I need to make it, my stuff look as good as that. And I was able to kind of build a portfolio in a very focused way.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to get a meeting with the lead. I got my work reviewed, but my portfolio reviewed by the lead character artist at EALA, and it was like, oh my god! Now, like he told me exactly what I need. Like, and all of those lessons still stick with me, and I tell them to people I know who are getting into it and stuff. But yeah, so then I started applying to every place I could, and I kept a spreadsheet. And maybe 70 applications through, I started to get requests for art tests. And
Oh
so I was
wow.
like, oh, okay. And then I didn't get any of those art tests. I didn't get any of those jobs. And I think it was the 86th place that I applied to, which was 2K, which was Kush Games. They were doing NHL for 2K.
Oh wow.
Um, I got I got a art test, and the first one actually, because it was for environment art, and I didn't know how to do any of that, so I didn't know. And then he's like, "Well," and I gave him like something because it was a time test. It was do part of a stadium, and I'm like, "How do you do that? Do the railing of the stairs? I don't know."
Yeah.
And then I did. I did. They called me in, and I did an art test of a mascot. Um, and I got the job. I barely got the job because my references didn't check out.
Oh
It
my
was a
gosh.
total like got to the finish. Yeah, the place I had worked at, like the person they talked to didn't know me, so he's like, what? That person never worked here. Like it was a nightmare. I was like, you got to be kidding. They're like, yeah,
Oh no.
references aren't checking. I was like, what? So they hired me on parole for 3 months, and then I got the job. But it was the type of thing where I'm like, no, 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 no.
You had to really
Um,
sweat that out.
oh yeah, I did. So yeah, and then I was doing mostly UI. They had me doing a lot of UI for that
Yeah.
instead of character art, and then I got to do like character art. That was my start.
Were you happy like after getting through the UI to start doing like character work?
Yes. So uh, the boot camp for me was they had me starting to do likenesses, head likenesses of the NHL players. This was before
Yeah.
they were doing scanning, right? So it was like one after another, one a day. So it was really good for just getting the human face down. And then let's see. Then I got a job at, let's see. After that, I went to work at left field, and then we moved here, and I didn't have a full time job, so it was a
Mhm.
bit of a risk. But we wanted to get out of California, and there were this is I'm in Austin. This is one of the biggest um, concentration of game studios outside of California. I think this is the biggest concentration of game studios outside of California. So,
Oh, okay.
so yeah, we moved here, and then I got a worked at Bauer as a very low like junior environment artist position, but I was like, I just wanted to work, and it was for Star Wars, the old the old Republic, um, the MMO, and I was super excited about that. And then a guy hired me, who I'm still friends with, Jason Smith, hired me at Sony for the character team. So that was
Yeah.
like, okay, now I'm doing characters. But
That
yeah,
had to be a big confidence boost to be working with for these like big name companies.
yeah, it was. Yeah, and for SWTOR, the Star Wars game, I was just happy to be working on it. I was so excited about the game.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, you can go if you play it. There'll be some sand dunes on Tatooine that I sculpted,
Oh, that's
and
cool.
some rocks. That's all I was doing for 2 months, but that was good.
Do you ever have the time to like play the games that you've worked on and kind of see your own work in them, or
No, it's not that I don't have the time. It's really funny. I play games less than anybody else in my house.
yeah?
So both my kids are gamers. My wife's a gamer. My wife plays Fallout 76 every day. Um, I play less than that, we'll just say. Which is not uncommon. A lot of people, they don't play the game they work on because you're in it all the time. But it's funny
Yeah.
because, like, if I don't know how to do something, my boss will be like, "Go ask your wife how to like do that in game."
She's
If I
the
have to test
expert.
something, yeah, so she'll tell me. But yeah, it's funny. So yeah, I play less than anybody else because I'm always like doing my own project or whatnot.
And you and your wife both founded Coven Games, right?
Yeah, yeah. So
So
she
what's
was
that like?
this.
Oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
so I
Go
was
ahead.
just saying. So yeah, she did all like the marketing, and social media because that she's what she does. Her day job is as a social media manager.
Oh wow,
So yeah,
nice.
so she kind of handled that.
Yeah, because that's got to be pretty interesting to work with your significant other.
Yeah, we did it. Well, it didn't. We didn't we didn't have any arguments about Witchkin. Like we didn't. But it was It was funny because I go to this on Sunday mornings. Just this Sunday morning, I go. Sunday's our cleaning day, so I'll go. I'll get donuts in the morning, and we'll all have donuts, and then we'll all clean. But I go to this store nearby, and it's owned by two people of I think from Thailand, and they own the store, they run it, and they've got their two little kids, which are there, but they're like 4 and 6 or something, and they're just hanging out like in one of the booths on their smartphones or whatnot.
Yeah,
That's while mom and dad work. And it was kind of the same thing with us with Witchkin because we'd go, set up our booth at a convention and our kids would just be sitting there doing stuff.
that's cool.
We tried to leverage them to market the game because they are the target audience. There was the kids who were playing Five Nights at Freddy's and they wanted nothing to do with that.
Oh
They
wow.
didn't want, it wasn't cool to them.
Yeah.
It felt really douchey and flexing for them to tell other kids like, "Hey, you should play this game." Yeah, I was like, we had to sit them down and explain to them how cool we were and why it's like you should hand out these cards which give like the demo and stuff like that. And like, no, we don't want to do that. I was like, well, wear the T-shirt. It just goes to show, like, no matter what you do, your parents won't be cool. Like, your parents could be it doesn't matter. Like, so yeah, that was
And
funny.
nothing against your kids, but if my
Mm.
dad came up to me and said, test out my game, promote my, I'd be like all for that. My
Oh yeah.
dad, he had like zero attachment to video games. He used to actually imitate me when I would play games. He's like, "Oh, you're just playing that brainless all."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Come on, man. You didn't grow up with it. You don't know." But
Yes.
but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I would be totally geeking out over something like that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to show like whatever's normal to a kid is just not cool, right? Like, so you
Yeah,
could own a candy store, and because I'm always like your parents, your kids' parents are like accountants, or they run a Walmart or something. Your parents
right.
make video games, and they're like, yeah, but I don't know, but I don't want to tell them about that. I'm like, okay. They'd be embarrassed if I went to like the parents' career day, right, and stood up and talked about game art, right? Even though all the
Right.
other kids, and my experience has been, all the other kids are like, "What? Tell me about it." They'd be like, "Oh God, shut
Like,
up,
oh
Dad."
geez, here we go.
Yeah, it's really funny. But yeah, they helped out a lot. I paid them with ice cream, so it's cheap labor.
I mean, hey, yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah,
It's pretty good for a kid, right? Get paid in
yeah.
ice cream. um, so I was curious about. So here's like an artist question: have
Sure.
you ever experienced flow states when you're doing your artwork? Um, I've always found that to be a fascinating thing when doing art. I found when I used to work on pieces, time would just fly by. Like 4 or 5 hours would go by, and you wouldn't even realize it.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a flow state to me.
Right?
Was this game art you were, or 3D art, or was this analog art? Like what was this?
It was basically like, man, I've done like so many different mediums. Like I started off with sketching, and
Okay.
I started getting really into doing realistic faces. And
Nice.
when you do that, I feel like you get so lost in the detail. And it was kind of like how I mentioned earlier when you hit the render button with Cinema 4D and you see that you have this potential to make something that looks great that you didn't even think you can make. That's how I felt about sketching.
Yeah.
And then of course, I moved on to like digital art on Photoshop, and I loved doing that as well. And but yeah, it's like I would find myself kind of getting lost in it, and then I would start to hear my stomach rumble, and I'm like, I gotta eat.
Yeah. No, I totally know that feeling, and I think that's the experience. You might even say that's why a lot of people do art, or
Yeah.
like whether it's art or people who are they work in with wood, or they are like not necessarily like an industrial welder, but people who make you see guys online that make swords, right? That's what they do, right? And I
Right.
think it's all the same thing where there's something about, I mean, I would call it the Buddhist sand painting thing. There's something about when, well, I don't know, this might be like too deep, or at least
No, you're fine.
sounding like it's trying to be too deep, but um, like in Zen, like philosophy or meditation or sitting, the whole idea is to be present in the moment, right? Because all the time we're thinking about what am I going to do tomorrow, or what just happened, or what happened yesterday, or what I should have or shouldn't have done or will do. And they'll, in sitting in Zen, the idea is no, 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 right here, right now. So like they'll say, if you listen to traffic, because when you're listening, you're hung on every sound, right? You're not
Right.
thinking about a car. You're just like, what's next? What's next? What's next? Pain also. When you're in severe pain, you're in the moment because you can't. You're like, is it as bad now? Oh, it's worse. Oh, okay, now it's slightly better. Like when you're, I don't know, I've had kidney stones. Like that's what I think of.
Ooh, yeah.
And sex, like where your mind is monitoring every little second, every detail. And I think that state of mind, whether you are doing art or like the Buddhists, they'll a lot of like they'll have the monks do something that is very focused, and where you're really zeroed in on some detail or some little process that keeps changing. And I
Right.
think that's what's going on with art, or when you're whether you're working on a face, or doing something like that. There's something like meditation where you are just in the moment. I get that with when I'm retopologizing. You know what topology is like in 3D art? So
Hmm.
like right, so you make your high res, right? Make your high detail model in ZBrush or something, and then you make the game resolution version of it where you're topologizing. So in most tools, you're building topology over the detail, like
Right.
one poly at a time. And that is the process I always think of that is very Zen. It's very just like I just kind of get lost in it, of
Right.
just to the point where then like I get up to go eat, or it's the end of the day, and I'm looking at surfaces, and my mind is still like, okay, how would I'd make a poly here, and then I'd make a triangle here so it would work. Like I think it's the same thing, where I think that's so much of the draw of, when you see an artist work like hard like you are, where you're really detailed, or they make this huge mural one brushstroke at a time, they just get in that zone. And I think that's so much of, I think that's what's going on for a lot of people.
Yeah,
But
no, absolutely. And I just feel like doing that sort of sculpting work, especially, just requires that ultimate patience and
yeah,
focus. Because even when I was like dipping my toe with ZBrush, I would get frustrated easily. I'm like, yeah, this isn't coming out the way I want. And I'm like,
right.
come on, like,
Yeah,
um, I think, what did I design? it was like a thwomp from like Super Mario. I just took
Oh,
like a
okay. Right.
cube, you know,
Right.
and kind
Right.
of like smoothed it out, like the surfaces, and would make like the indents of the face and everything. And
Right.
that was pretty fun to do. But I can't imagine, because then I saw like some of your speed sculpts, and I'm seeing you do like a demon head, and I'm
Oh God,
like,
those are
man,
so bad. But
oh
yeah,
no, I love
I need
those.
to take
Like,
those down.
it's like, yeah, like it looked so freaking awesome, and I'm looking at that. I'm like, man, I wish I could be on David's level.
Yeah, well, it's like it's all practice, right? I
Right.
look at my stuff from, well, like that. Like I cringe to think about it because I know those speak sculpts, and now I'm like, oh yeah, I do need to take those off of my channel. But at the time, I was like, man, this is wow. I really chopped myself with this one, and then now I'm like, oh my god, that's embarrassing. Like it's not, and I'm sure 10 years from now, I will look back at my work, but. Yeah, it's all. I think the thing is with ZBrush, what I think everybody falls into, especially when you're beginning, is because the strength of the tool is in detail. The temptation, I think, the inclination is to get into the detail,
Hmm.
and like with all art, and this is what we see, like with students and stuff like that, is if your broad strokes aren't right, your fine strokes won't be right,
Right.
and if you do a lot of fine strokes, you won't even be able to tell what's wrong with your broad strokes, right? So you see, like one telltale sign of more beginner work and stuff like that is they'll do a render and you'll see all the skin pores on a very strange looking face.
Yeah.
And it's, if the structure of your face is not right, if the proportions aren't right, if the flow of the large forms aren't right, and then the flow of the medium forms aren't right, doesn't matter how good the small forms are. But ZBrush, because it is so powerful with details like that, we all just kind of want to get into the detail. Um, but that's a common problem, I think.
ZBrush could be kind of intimidating to someone that's
That's
just starting it.
horribly designed. It's the
It's
UI is horribly designed.
it's like you're starting off and you're clicking into the tool set, and there's like
Yep.
right away like 60 different types of
Yep.
brushes, and they all have these like specific functions. And I know for me at least, I had to watch so many tutorials of someone
Yes.
just saying, here's the 5 you're just gonna need
Yes.
right off the
Exactly.
bat, you know.
Yeah.
And like, don't get scared by all of these tools that they throw at you
And
immediately.
nobody uses them. That's the big secret.
Yeah. You see, there you
I've
go.
made I've gotten as far as I have in my career by using about 10% of ZBrush. The same
Wow.
10%. There's a few things they'll add, a few new tools, but Pixelogic is notorious for adding new things without fixing broken stuff in the past.
Yeah.
And they will add something, and I always get the sense, I don't know, I always have the scene of like them messing with something and the program's being like, whoa, it did that? Huh, it turned the model inside out. We
Yeah.
should make that a feature. Let's make that a button. Model inside out button. And all the way, like the amount of stuff they produce where, the vast majority of the artists that use ZBrush are working in film or games. They're
Right.
not doing gallery work, right? And when you look at all the top work on ZBrush Central, they're using the same, 20% of the program.
Yeah.
But Pixelogic has this weird thing. It's like more is better. It's like strip down, take out everything you're not going to use. That's the first thing is make yourself a palette of
Yeah.
just the tools you're going to use. Because I use Move Brush, Clay, the standard brush. I use about 8 brushes.
Yeah.
That's it. And then I use a lot of Dynamesh and a few other things. But yeah,
Because the clay buildup tool is like good for kind of finding like the
yeah,
overall
very
shape,
rough.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
a
then
lot
you
of people
kind
use
of
that.
start to smooth it out from there, right? And
Yeah.
just kind of until you really have what you're looking for. Um, I know there was one YouTube channel. I think they're called Flipped Normals. I don't know if
Hmm.
you're familiar with them, but they have these incredible ZBrush tutorials where they will make like a Thanos head, like, or
Right.
a bust of him, and say like this was only done using like 2 or 3
Yep.
tools. you know. So
That's right. No, that's pixel logic for you. It is so weird. Uh, I don't know. They could just so strip it down. Because
yeah,
there's something to be said that people work in different ways. But it seems to me, in general, there's so much stuff where I'm like, who uses that? I've never seen this used. I've
yeah.
never seen this whole thing used with all these controls. Yeah, it's really weird. Um, yeah.
There's a specific piece of work that you did that I wanted to bring up. It was a sculpt you did of Logan Nine Fingers from the
Oh
first
yeah.
Law. Now, I came across a blog post by the author of those
Yes.
books, Joe Abercrombie,
Yeah.
and I was like, "Wow, this is great! Like, you got the attention of the author."
Yes.
And
That was cool.
yeah, and
Yeah.
now I did see that he did two blog posts. One was showing your first like iteration of Logan, and then there were certain people that were, praising you, but then also
But
you had some people that were criticizing
yeah, they
your
didn't. It wasn't how
sculpting.
they saw the character. Yeah. Yeah.
Right, like they were, I think, comparing the likeness to like Sean Bean or something like
Yeah,
that.
I
Like,
remember that. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I was just gonna say he was. I was so impressed with him that he took the time to talk and put my work out there. I am a huge Joe Abercrombie fan. I've read all his books. I mean, I don't know if you have. They're phenomenal, phenomenal books.
yeah. I'm
Best
not
character.
familiar, but yeah.
If yeah, it's like Game of Thrones.
Oh,
They're just excellent. But yeah, he was so nice to put it out there and kind of and to defend it. And I had some other correspondence with him where he took the time to talk. But yeah, that was
yeah.
so cool with him to do that.
Yeah, because then he worded the second blog post kind of funny. Like he was saying, "Listen, Dave listened to all your little
Yeah, a
your
little
little
nitpicking.
credit, yeah, little nitpicking, and
Yeah, yeah,
he was nice enough to make the alterations for you guys, you know." So it's
right,
kind of
right.
funny how he worded
Yeah.
that, and but oh, it was a beautiful sculpt, and
Oh, thanks.
that's like that was essentially what I would have wanted to end up doing with 3D art is capturing some human faces, and because that's can't be easy to do. So
Yeah, it's I've always said character art is harder than it characters are the hardest thing to sculpt because we are characters, right? So
right,
human beings are through evolution are extremely fine tuned on faces. The slightest thing off is that's what uncanny valley is, right? We don't have uncanny
yeah,
valley about trees. We're not like,
right,
oh, that tree kind of makes me uncomfortable. It's That's creepy. That tree's not quite right. Like because we're not trees, right? If we were trees, we'd be like, oh, I don't like that.
yeah,
But yeah, but because the standard for, and I'm not anywhere near the standard. I have colleagues and I have people I've worked with like Tony Reynolds and stuff who just amazing facial sculptors, likeness sculptors and stuff like that. But
yeah.
I think the reason why faces are so hard is because you don't have to be an artist. Like you could be anybody and you will pick up on the smallest thing that is not quite right. Um, and I remember reading that uncanny valley is a psychological phenomenon because your subconscious thinks when it's off, it thinks it's looking at a talking corpse.
Wow,
Your subconscious, your cave brain, is like, that's a human, but it's not moving right. And its eyes look off. It's a talking corpse, and it makes you very uncomfortable. You don't know that's what's going on, but like, why would it make people uncomfortable? Like, why would it make why do we call it creepy, as opposed to just being like, well, that's off. It's because at least that's the theory. It's like our inner brain's like, that's a talking corpse. I don't like that. That's really scary.
there's a YouTube video I need to show you. I don't know if you've ever seen it or heard of this channel. It's called Vsauce. This super
Oh
popular
yeah,
YouTuber.
yeah,
He did
yeah,
a whole video on the uncanny valley, and ever since I saw that video, I'm like, this is so fascinating on like what people consider creepy.
yeah.
And honestly, I think that's probably why people find dolls creepy because it's like human but not quite.
It's a
And
dead child.
right,
It's a dead
exactly.
child. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's Marcy. There's the uncanny. valley there. Yeah.
So I sculpted Marcy based on a photo of a child from London at about the turn of the century, and then I detailed her from what I was able to find of pictures of dead children. So, like, there was
Oh my
a
gosh.
child, a Pakistani child, who they were burying him, and okay, why does this look creepy? Like, let me try to get that on Marcy,
Right.
and that's why dolls are scary,
Yeah.
because it's a dead child, which is, I mean, what's more disturbing than that?
Exactly.
But yeah,
Even that video went on to mention like why when people wear masks, people find that creepy because it's hiding the intentions of
yeah, yeah, that
the
makes
person,
sense.
because
Yeah,
you're kind of looking and you're like, I don't know if this thing's going to
right.
attack me or greet
Or
me
give me a
with
balloon.
kindness. Or, yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
I
right,
don't
yeah,
know.
just
Yeah,
like it. Yeah,
yeah,
but
exactly. Yeah, that stuff, the kind of the psychological, the psychology. Like, so I'm a big kind of evolution buff. I find that evolutionary psychology fascinating. I don't have a degree or anything like that, but I find stuff about horror. You get these universal things that are terrifying to people, and you can draw a straight line between all these things and our past, as far as living on the African savannah or living, in the wild. What I see is all monster designs across the world draw heavily on large cats. They all have
oh wow,
claws, they
yeah,
all have teeth, and their eyes glow.
oh
So just like in the dark, if you're like in Africa or wolves in Europe or something like that, and you see something moving towards you that where you can just see the eyes, it's pretty much over. Or you better run really quickly. You're probably not going to make it. So um, it's interesting to me. Or they draw from all the things that are biologically dangerous to us, right? They draw from bugs. We have a natural fear of a lot of bugs because bugs have poison, and certainly reptiles that are snakes are poisonous, right?
right,
So it's interesting to me. You have this like almost like a Jungian biopsychology in all of us. Like, you could take a human being and put him on another planet entirely with completely different fauna, and they probably will dream about scary things that are have claws, teeth, and glowing eyes, and maybe scales, or like, that's just the way we evolved
it's just
to avoid those
instinct.
things. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's just instinct, and you get these universals, which I think are really interesting.
I don't know where I heard
Um,
this from, but years ago, I remember hearing that sometimes when people sleep on their backs, they tend to have nightmares versus if they had slept on their sides. And I think
huh?
that's because of, years ago when we were just like cavemen, we were always afraid of some sort of danger. So, like, they
Right.
would be ready, like, to just jump right up and, like,
Ah,
protect,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know? And honestly, I've found that with myself. If like I've always been a side sleeper, but if
Right.
somehow I passed out, I was watching like a YouTube video and I'm sleeping on my back, I would have nightmares. So I'm like, maybe
That's
there is
really
some truth to
interesting.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. It's been weird. Like with my kids, that was another thing with Witchkin is like, having the. It's like you forget what it's like to be a kid until you have kids, right? You remember some things, but then when you see your kids at every age, I have a teenage daughter now, and she's talking about some of the stuff she's going through, and I'm like, I had forgotten about this. Like, I'd forgotten about that psychological thing that happens.
Yeah.
Um, but with the way kids are scared and what they're scared of and the type of things that go through their minds before they go to sleep, like when you have kids and they say it back to you, you're like, oh yeah, that. Um, and it's been interesting, with my kids. That was one of the things with Witchkin is like, okay, trying to really create that feeling of what it's like to feel that vulnerable, to be in helpless horror and stuff. But it was interesting because my son, he wouldn't. He had certain ways he liked to sleep. He didn't like to sleep with his back to the room,
Huh.
and he didn't. There would be certain like just hang-ups about his angle to the window, right? The way he could sleep to the window. But
Yeah.
that's what you said made me think about that, how we all have those little hang-ups.
I
How
used to
scary.
be terrified of a closet that's open when I was trying to sleep
Oh
as a
yeah.
kid. And
Yeah.
I got, listen, I got like, I used to watch too much horror as a kid. You know, like I mentioned, Chucky, I saw it,
Yeah.
like the original it. Like
Yes. Well, how old
that
are you?
one, I'm 31.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and, I remember watching those movies as a kid, and, like, there was one scene in the original It where his face as the clown is on the moon, and, like,
Oh.
it would never make me wanna stare outside my bedroom
Yeah.
window and see the moon because of 'cause of that scene, like,
No, it
oh my
it is
gosh.
crazy. Yeah, all the things. That's why get somebody like Stephen King who can just tap into that. It's almost like he knows the frequency that we all have. That.
Yeah. And
But yeah.
in that Vsauce video, he alludes to Stephen King and says he defined three different definitions for fear.
Oh,
One would be the gross out. The
yeah.
other would just be, I guess, like a jump
Horror,
scare.
terror, and
Horror, terror,
gore, or something like.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And so I found that to be fascinating too. It's like all these different levels of scary that affect
yeah.
everybody differently, you know?
Yeah, I'm a huge Stephen King fan. That's one thing I do when I'm working. I have listened to Salem's Lot. I'm not joking. Probably 30 times. I
Really?
could probably recite it to you. Again, it's having something, even though I know it, right? Repeating, and I know it, and I'm listening to the story again, and then when it's over, I start it over again. Or Cycle the Werewolf or something. They're making a Stephen King movie and it's taking place in the 70s, thank God. Um, or making a Salem's Lot movie and it's taking place in the 70s. But
Yeah.
yeah, it is interesting. And then like the different kinds of horror, cosmic horror. My son told me, I don't think he'd have a problem with me. Maybe he will or won't listen to this, but he had a dream that I was like, that sounds like a movie. I have never seen him so scared. He This happened about a year ago, and he woke me up, and he was shaking. He could barely tell me it, and I was like, "What did you dream?" And he was like, watching him try to put it into words, it came down to this: he dreamt that he was sleeping in his room, and every night, me or my wife would bring in a crate, and inside the crate was one of our relatives, and they all had deformities, and he would have to sleep in the bed, and whatever was in the crate might come out while he was sleeping or be in there. And then the next night we'd come in and bring another one. The way
Oh
he
my
described it,
gosh.
the fact that we were part of it, right? The fact that his parents were the ones doing this, were bringing in the terror and bringing like, now you have to sleep, and we close the door. It was
That's
profoundly
wild.
terrifying. And I was like, God, that could be a game, that could be a movie, but I have
Yeah.
never seen him so scared when he was trying to say what it was. Um, but yeah, that I was like, that is the worst dream I've ever heard. Like your parents are part of the whole thing, like, and now you have to sleep. And here's the crate. And
That's
then the
so
next night we
scary.
bring in a different crate with a different relative with different deformities.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh. Can you imagine
yeah, it was,
having like a dream that vivid? Like my fiance all the time like will detail out her dreams to me to the point where she writes them down in like her notes in her phone. And it
huh?
sounds almost very Harry Potterish. She's like entering worlds and all this stuff. I'm like, man, you should be writing books or something or
Yeah,
coming up with
yeah,
ideas. Like we're talking about
yeah,
fantasy
totally.
novels earlier. I mean, that's got to be where these authors found inspiration
I
for
think
these
so.
amazing works of art. um
Yeah.
you mentioned Game of Thrones earlier. It's funny how George R.R. Martin came up with the idea for Game of Thrones because of his pet turtles. And
Huh?
he imagined them having their own adventures and like being in their own world and everything. And
Oh,
I
whoa.
found that to be so fascinating, like where where
That's where it
people's
came from.
yeah, like where people's creative minds come from. Imagine you'd
Yeah.
never think turtles of
No.
all things. It's so
Yeah.
outrageous.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah,
That's really interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man. But what was I gonna say too?
How long have you been doing the podcast?
Oh, only since January.
Yeah.
It's been yet another creative hobby I've added to my list. I feel like I
That's
have
good.
so many. It's bad, but I've always felt like a creative my whole life. My day job, I'm an accountant, but to be quite honest with you, not a fan of it. I got pushed into it,
I
and
don't think of creativity and accounting. I never
oh
put those
no,
two
no.
together. Right.
Definitely not. That's why it's like such a struggle for my brain when I'm doing it. It's
Right.
literally like I'm fighting my own self when I'm doing it. But when I'm finished with work, it's like I turn on the other side of my brain, and then I get to be happy again. And, whether
Yeah, that's
that's like
great.
streaming a video game or, doing this podcast and,
Yeah.
anything where I get to really exercise that creative part of my brain. And
Huh.
now I just remembered what I wanted to ask you. What
Oh,
were like some of the first experiences of like creativity you had growing up?
so my mom tells a story of how I never wanted to draw, to the point where she's like, oh, what's going on with this kid? Like, and she finally got me. She's like, just draw mommy a picture, please. Just draw mommy a picture. She gave me a crayon, and I
Yeah,
guess I drew something that she was like, whoa. But for a 3-year-old, she was like, huh, this kid has something here.
yeah.
Um, I remember. I just remember I was drawing. Um, um, actually, recently have my mom brought me a some of my drawings I did when I was in 4th grade, and they were all of werewolves. I was really into werewolves,
Yeah.
and they're really funny. I wish I had them. I could show them to you, but yeah, and they're all there's blood. Like I drew on them in black pen, but I also had a red pen,
Mhm.
so there's drips of blood off of everything. The teeth, the claws, and the feet claws have blood like trailing behind them.
Oh wow.
So I was always into kind of the darker stuff, I guess. Um, but yeah, I mean, I just remember I was drawing, and then in high school and stuff, you know.
Did you ever like
Um,
draw in class and stuff like that?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
I drew these tattoos when I was like 18. I was
Oh
sitting
wow.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I drew in class. I got in trouble for it. I went off on my, got suspended because I went off on one of my teachers for throwing away one of my drawings.
Oh.
Um, yeah, and she was right to do it, or at least to take it away. But you know, I didn't deal with that well. But yeah. So yeah, I was always the kid drawing in class.
And
Uh,
it's funny because like I always found it weird how like school in this country kind of takes a bunch of different kids with all different brains and types
yes.
and fits them into all the same things.
Yeah.
You know, that I've never understood because I have never been I would never consider myself a good student. My brain wanders. It's a creative type
Yeah.
of mind. And it was always so hard for me to try to pay attention and care about math or about like these
Yes.
things that they
Well, you
force
cared
you to
enough.
do.
You became an accountant. Like
Right? Yeah, now
you had
it would
something going on.
it would make sense like if I really cared about that. But
Right.
like it's just weird to me. It's like it would be nice if there was a system where they could kind of like sit you down and be like, okay, we figured you out. You're a creative, so art classes, or you go
Right.
here
It
and
makes
you
me
do
think
that.
of the was it that movie Ants with Woody Harrelson,
Yeah,
when the babies are born and the larva, and they either give them a like a pickaxe. They're like, this is a worker. This is a this.
yeah,
And you know, in communist countries, a lot of times that's, you know, like this is how you will serve the country and the community best. You go, you know, you are tall, you will play basketball. You know, you or whatever. Um, but yeah, there's something to that, I think, because I was somebody who was very underserved by public education. I was a massive problem behavior wise. You know, I graduated late. Um, I did some college, and then I just kind of found my own way. But it's been interesting having kids to see them, because I'm honest with them. I'm just like, yeah, they're making you learn something you will never use your entire life.
right.
But
Yeah,
just like when you go to, I mean, what I came to kind of realize, or at least this is where I'm at. I don't know. I wouldn't argue this necessarily, but as much as it sucks. Um, Things like math, I never made it past algebra 2. I use math in my brain a lot with some of what I'm doing, but I can't really articulate. But I know that part. My dad's a physicist, right? So I think I inherited some of that,
Yeah.
the thinking aspect of it, but not the technical, like doing equations and stuff. But anyways, I told my daughter, I'm like, look, you will never need to like build a house using this geometry, but it's just like how you will never have to lift a you will never have to lift a 150-pound bag of something like this,
Right.
but you're working out your muscles when you go to the gym to do that, right? To make it better. So you by using your brain, you're kind of working it out. But yeah, I think there should be. I know in California they have programs where they're like, okay, you're gifted in this, so for high school, you're going to this place which is focused on this, or at least for some kids, maybe the kids who are in the right district or whatever. But yeah,
Right.
public education is, yeah,
It's such a crapshoot. It just seems like,
yeah, it is.
it's like,
Yeah,
here, just go to this place where, it's like a social jungle, and you got to
yep,
figure yourself out. And
yeah.
man, it just makes me immediately think of like all my memories of middle school and high school, and I'm like, oh, it's flooding in right
Yeah,
now.
yeah, and I think a lot of it is, there's a character building element to it. I think the value of public education as opposed to private education is the diversity, as far as you're in with kids that you don't share things in common with, whether it's, less so with race because we tend to, things tend to be geographically segregated in any given city, but, things
Right.
like, religion, things like that. Um, you're with people who you normally wouldn't connect with. Um, I think there's a lot of value in that, um, just because that's the real world, right? We don't choose our neighbors or our colleagues or whatever. So I think that's a big part of it. But
Yeah.
yeah,
The experience is more of like a personality molder, just getting you
yeah,
ready for post high school and real world experiences. So,
yeah, yeah. And dealing with and this is something like right now with a lot of the things that my kids are with. There's a lot more awareness about bullying, which is good.
right.
But just like anything, there is value in learning to deal with difficult people, right?
Yeah.
And if the only way you know how to deal with a difficult person is to go to the authority, well, that's not real life, right?
Yeah.
Like, and obviously, no kid should be harassed, and certainly not anything physical happen to them. But my daughter said this, and this was like such a. I started saying what I started saying. Some kid said something she didn't like or bothered her, and I was like, well, sticks and stones may break your bones. And then she said, but words cut even deeper. And I'm like, what?
Oh.
And I'm like, what are you saying? She's like, yeah, that's how it goes. But words cut even deeper. I was like, no, it's words will never hurt me. And
Right.
it was such a like, wait, that's what they're teaching now? That's the idea?
Yeah.
Is that words are now worse? No, you deal with words.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
but that I was like, this is going a little too far with anti-bullying. My
Yeah.
my my mom was a counselor for first grade school and then middle school counselor for 30 years. Um, but she would talk about how a lot of the anti-bullying stuff, on one end it's good, but what it's also done is it's made it where kids who are toxic, who are not pleasant for other kids to be around, it's made it impossible for those kids to have any consequences because any exclusion of those for their behavior is seen as bullying. Oh, you're excluding, right?
Hmm.
So she said we would get these kids who were just jerks, or they would do something that normally, as we all, when we're socialized, like you learn, you can do these things and say these things, but you can't do these things and say these things because kids won't want to be your friend, right? They won't want to be around you, right?
Right.
If you're picking your nose all the time in the lunchroom, nobody's going to sit next to you, right?
Yeah.
If you don't share, right, when you're playing, kids won't want to. Kids learn this at such an early age. But with some of the more aggressive anti-bullying, it's you get these these kids who are just they're just misbehaving. They're jerks. They don't or they're really unpleasant, and they have to be included in everything. They have no incentive to change or to modify their behavior.
Yeah,
So that's interesting.
it's tough because it's like no matter what sort of things we can put in place for bullying, even awareness to it, it's always going to exist. It's just a matter of figuring out, okay, how can we teach our kids to, you know, handle it or deal with
Yeah,
it
how to
better.
deal with it. Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's it's a tough thing dealing with bullying.
yeah,
You know, it really is. Because I know
mm,
I went through my experiences with it, and but in the end, you know, it's either going to make you weaker or stronger, and you know, you just hope that you can just develop a thick skin and be able to deal with it head
yeah.
on. You know,
And I think you're right in that there are people who are weaker as adults because of bullying they had to deal with, and that's not okay, right?
right,
But there are also kids who, had they had to deal with some bullying, would be better and more resilient and more, and there's value in that, right?
right.
Because one day you're going to be at a bar and somebody's going to say something to you. You can't be like, bartender, he's being mean to me. You have to learn to be like, dude, I'm going to walk away, or
Yeah,
let me buy you a drink, or whatever. You're going to have to deal with it in some way,
exactly. You're not gonna have someone to
instead of
bail
like,
you out.
yeah, where's the principal? Yeah, it's like,
I gotta blow my like
so
bullying whistle really quick. Hold
yeah,
on.
exactly. Hello. Um, well, you see this with with some. I mean, this is going to make you sound old, um, but you do see younger, a lot of times younger employees who will choose to go to HR rather than deal with a conflict with somebody. Somebody
Yeah,
says something that they're offended or they didn't like some behavior, and to me, this is what and I've had a lot of conversations with my kids with this. I was like, no, no, no. You first talk to the person that's doing it. Always,
right.
always, always. If that doesn't work, then you go to the teacher. You don't go to the teacher first. Um, but if you're not taught that, if you're like, no, 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 the way to deal with it is to go to the authority figure.
Because more often than not, I feel like it's a miscommunication. You know,
Oh yeah,
because maybe sometimes when someone is bullying someone, it's because it's as a result of their upbringing. Maybe that's how they bond by, you know, kind of jabbing you a little bit, whether it's something
yeah,
with your appearance or whatever. But then maybe you never know. They probably feel bad about it on the
yeah,
inside. But when you bring it up to them and bring it to their
yeah,
attention, that's when they'll be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, man. You know, I was just kidding."
yeah,
So that's great that that's what you've instilled in your kids is go, you know, try to attack it at the source first, and
yeah.
then, you know, if it's
Then
not
if it
going to get
still
resolved.
happens,
Yeah,
yeah, and that's the way I would deal with anything. A colleague says something or that I don't like or I thought was out of line or something. I say to them first. If they do it a second time, I go to their boss.
right.
Go all the way up to the president of the United States if I have to. But yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, I think miscommunication is a big part of it. But it gets tricky. I mean, I think communication, it is about risk, right?
Yeah,
And I think that for a lot of people, I think, like you said, like they maybe harassment or a little bit of harassment is a way to. I know they've talked about that with men in particular, of the way men kind of give each other shit
yeah,
as a way to. It's a testing of loyalty or a testing of the way you do you talk to your siblings or your parents or whatever. You would never talk to a stranger that way, right? But they love them, you love them, and you giving them shit for something. I think it's almost a way to be like, you're kind of testing. You're like, no, no, it's safe for me to say that because you're loyal to me, you're going to be there or whatever.
yeah,
um, but some people, they don't. I think they either, on one end, they go too far with it, or on the other end, they're hypersensitive to it and they take everything very personally.
yeah.
I don't know what the right kind of level is, but yeah.
I know that even today, anything that I still take offense to with people is like because I don't know you. I don't,
Right,
you know, versus if my brother is ribbing me about something, it's like, okay, fine. I know your intentions are good, but I
right.
don't know the intentions of a stranger who's just coming to a family gathering, you know, and
Yes,
and
yes,
is kind of trying to test me.
yeah,
And it's almost as if like they have this mask on, like we spoke about earlier, and you
Yeah,
don't you
yeah.
don't
You don't know
know
what they're doing.
the intentions. It's like, are you really trying to say, what you're trying to say, like for bad, or what are you trying to do? Like, so
Yeah,
that's where I have my guard up usually. But once I can understand the intentions, I'm like, okay, they're fine. They were just, or something like that.
yeah.
So
Yeah, and I think there are definitely people, I've known people, I'm sure I have done it. I'd like to think I haven't done it a lot, where the jab is pointed, right?
mhm.
You're saying something to kind of, um, I don't know. I think we've all had family like that, right?
Oh yeah.
They're overly critical, or they throw something at you. I know the mother-in-law, daughter-in-law scenario. Even though my wife loves my mom, um, it's common. I know a lot of women talk about that either with their mothers or their mother-in-laws, just throwing a little something out there.
Hmm.
We see it all the time in comedies, right? Where they'll say something that's kind of seems just kind of off the top of the head and innocent, but it's kind of mean.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but
It's
yeah,
like, I feel like we all know at least one person that kind of likes to like find the weakness in you, and will try
yeah,
to exploit it just to see how you're going to react. Like they love reactions and things like that.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
but
yeah. And it's been interesting seeing my kids kind of deal with that of
yeah.
like the same thing. Their friend will they'll have a frenemy, right, that'll say things once in a while where they're like, "Ah, it's really me." Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, David, we just hit our time, and
yeah. We went over
Well,
everything.
yeah, yeah, we really went like full circle there with a bunch of stuff. But man, this was an awesome episode, and I appreciate your time and being here today. And do you have like anything to plug or promote before we?
No, not right now. You might talk to me in a year or so, and I might have something. But
Yeah,
no, I really enjoyed this too. I think you were a great host. I hope you get more. Hope you get lots of hits,
thank you.
and more guests. No,
Yeah,
this
I
has been great.
appreciate it,
Thanks so
and
much for having me.
absolutely. And thank you guys so much for listening or watching wherever you're checking this podcast out. And we'll definitely catch you in the next one. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.